My stepmom made no effort to lower her voice. She took center stage at my graduation party, raising her glass and proclaiming, "We're moving without you. There's no hesitation, no shame, just a public severing so sharp and sudden that the entire backyard fell into a stunned silence." Then, with a cruel twist, she added, "This house is simply too good for someone like you." The laughter that followed felt more scorching than the summer air itself. I didn't shed a tear or plead my case. I simply met her gaze and said, "Have a safe move." Because what she didn't know was devastatingly simple. I had purchased the house last month, and the very next morning, eviction notices would arrive. Before I continue, tell me, where are you listening from? I grew up in a house where silence was always the safest language. My John remarried when I was 12, and from the instant my stepmom crossed the threshold, the very atmosphere in our home shifted. She moved through life with the unquestioning confidence of someone who believed everything she encountered was hers by default, including him, the house, and eventually, the very narrative of who I was permitted to be. I learned early on that any space I occupied had to be rigorously justified. If I lingered in the living room too long, she'd accidentally vacuum around my feet. If I cooked dinner, she'd discreetly adjust the seasoning the moment I turned away, as if meticulously erasing my contribution. None of it was ever loud, but every single act was profoundly deliberate. My John never confronted her behavior. He simply drifted into her gravitational pull, leaving me to orbit precariously on the edges. The house quickly became her personal stage. Every holiday, every gathering, every strained, forced smile, family photo revolved entirely around her unwavering need to be admired. The walls were adorned with carefully curated memories that somehow never included me, graduations of her own children, lavish vacations. I wasn't even invited to birthday parties. I watched them unfold from the solitary vantage point of the staircase. But I stayed. I studied relentlessly. I worked part-time after school. And little by little, I quietly built a resilience so profound no one ever seemed to notice. The only person who truly saw me was my grandma. She lived across town in a tiny, comforting place that always smelled faintly of warm apples and lavender detergent. She kept a small table by the window, just for the two of us. One cup for her tea, one for mine. Whenever the house felt too heavy, I'd escape there, and she'd gently remind me, "You don't need to shout to be powerful, Emma. Some storms form in silence." I carried those profound words with me through high school, through the late nights spent studying at the kitchen table while everyone else slept, through the subtle, insidious ways my stepmom constantly tried to shrink me. She despised my successes. It meant her carefully constructed version of me simply wasn't sticking. So when my graduation day finally arrived, Grandma promised she'd sit in the front row, no matter what. My stepmom dismissed it with a casual shrug, declaring that the day was more about the family than the diploma. But I didn't care about her opinion. I had earned that moment, every single bit of it. The party afterward was, predictably, her idea. She decorated the backyard in colors that appealed solely to her taste, invited people I barely knew, and strategically positioned herself so photographers would capture her at the very center of every shot. I helped set up the tables, though no one offered a word of thanks. I had long grown accustomed to being the invisible pair of hands working diligently behind the scenes of everything. Still, a quiet part of me harbored a faint hope that things might be different that day. Perhaps my John would look at me with the warmth he used to, or my step-siblings might utter something genuine for once. I even hoped my stepmom might set aside her relentless performance long enough to allow me to feel like I belonged. But standing there, surrounded by laughter that was never intended for me, in a house that never truly felt like mine, I sensed the shift even before she opened her mouth. Something was building. Something cold. Something meticulously prepared. And deep down, I knew this celebration wasn't for me at all. It was merely the stage for my public humiliation. The moment my stepmom tapped her spoon against her glass, the entire backyard seemed to reconfigure itself. The lively chatter softened, the music dipped almost imperceptibly, and every single face turned toward her as if she were the bride at my own graduation instead of me. She reveled in that attention, being the center, being the sun around which everyone else revolved. I already felt my stomach clench, the familiar tightening that always preceded one of her verbal attacks. She smiled widely, the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes, and announced, "Well, since today is all about new beginnings, I think it's the perfect time to share ours." Her voice drifted across the yard, smooth and perfectly rehearsed. People leaned in, anticipating something sentimental. perhaps a heartfelt toast to my future. I wasn't expecting anything for myself, but I also wasn't prepared for the sheer force of the blow. "We're moving," she declared brightly. But not all of us. A few guests offered polite, confused chuckles. She allowed the silence to hang, just long enough to sharpen its edge. "We're moving without you, Emma." The word struck me like a sudden, cold wave. Conversations instantly halted. My John blinked hard, as if he had rehearsed this exact moment in his head, but was utterly unprepared for its brutal delivery out loud. My step-siblings stiffened beside the dessert table. And the guests, people who knew me only through her carefully curated lens, turned to see how I would react. She didn't stop there. "This house," she said, sweeping her perfectly manicured hand around as if she owned the very oxygen we breathed, "is too good for someone like you." This time the laughter wasn't polite. It was thin, sharp, cutting, and undeniably real. A few people whispered behind their palms. Someone near the grill murmured, "Did she really just say that?" But no one intervened. Not my John, not my step-siblings, not a single person who had eaten the food I'd spent all morning helping to prepare. A searing heat rose behind my eyes, not from embarrassment. Humiliation was an old, familiar coat by then, but from a sudden, stark clarity, the kind that only arrives when someone finally utters the quiet part out loud. I looked at my John, searching his face for a flicker of the man who used to braid my hair when I was little. Instead, he stared fixedly at the deckboards, as if the unvarnished truth had been nailed firmly into them. Her children laughed the loudest. One of them nudged the other and joked about finally getting their space back. It stung, not because of their words, but because I realized they had rehearsed this too. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was planned, coordinated, executed in front of witnesses so they could all pretend it was just a joke. A slow, heavy certainty settled deep in my chest. This wasn't the first time they had pushed me out, but it was the first time they had craved an audience for it, and yet, even in that moment, I refused to give them what they desperately wanted. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg them to reconsider. I watched them laugh, and something inside me quietly realigned. A soft click, like a lock turning securely into place. Because that speech, that humiliating little performance, told me everything I needed to know. They thought they held all the power. They thought I would always remain small. They thought I had no options. And they had absolutely no idea what I had already done. That was the pivotal moment right there under the twinkling string lights and the fake applause, when the story ceased being about their cruelty and began, irrevocably, to be about my choice. When the party finally thinned out, I slipped quietly inside the house, the very house they claimed was too good for someone like me. Their laughter still drifted in through the open door, but inside everything was hushed. The kind of stillness that feels like a held breath. I leaned against the kitchen counter, letting the cool surface ground me. For a moment, I allowed the full weight of it all to settle. Every dismissal, every correction, every time they had made me feel like I was merely temporary. Through the window, I could see my stepmom standing with her friends, reenacting her announcement with exaggerated hand gestures. They burst into laughter once more. My chest tightened, but not with hurt this time. It was with an unwavering certainty. That small click I'd felt earlier had transformed into something steady, like a quiet engine warming up. I went upstairs to my room, the one space in the house she never bothered to decorate because she had simply assumed I wouldn't stay long. A single lamp illuminated the corner, casting a warm, comforting circle on the desk where I'd spent months meticulously planning my future. On top of it sat a file folder, not a sentimental scrapbook, not a graduation card, but plain documents. Real estate contracts, payment confirmations, the irrefutable proof that I had already stepped into adulthood on my own terms. I sat down and reopened the folder, running my fingers carefully over the papers, the deed bearing my name, the transfer confirmations, the notice templates I'd researched late at night while everyone else slept soundly. I hadn't planned to use them this soon, and certainly not like this. But cruelty, I realized, has a way of accelerating things. Buying the house hadn't been a revenge plot. It had been pure survival. I'd saved for years, worked diligently through college, and seized a rare opportunity when the previous owner needed a quick sale. I never told my family because I didn't want their opinions, or worse, their sabotage. And now that silence, my lifelong defense mechanism, had become my most formidable shield. A soft knock came at my door. My John's voice followed, low and hesitant. "Emma, are you okay?" I stared at the doorknob. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded worried. Worried about how he looked, how the scene might reach the neighbors, how his wife might later spin this narrative. I couldn't offer him comfort he hadn't earned. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. "You should enjoy the rest of the night." There was a long, suspended pause. Then his footsteps slowly retreated down the hall. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That was the last moment I felt any flicker of doubt. I gathered the documents and placed them neatly into a single envelope. Tomorrow would be simple, legal, and clean. No yelling, no accusations, just boundaries enforced the way adults enforce them, through decisive action, not emotional reaction. Before leaving the room, I took one last look around. Every corner carried a memory of being overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel small. But none of that mattered anymore. Not after tonight. I walked downstairs, slipped past the dwindling crowd unnoticed, and stepped into the quiet, cool air outside. Tomorrow they would receive the notices. Tomorrow the house would no longer be hers. The next morning felt unnaturally bright, the kind of intense sunlight that made everything appear cleaner than it truly was. I woke up before my alarm, my thoughts already sharp and steady. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about establishing boundaries, about showing them quietly, legally, irrefutably, that the power they believed they held over me had never actually existed. I dressed simply, pulled my hair back, and slipped the prepared documents into a slim envelope. Outside, the street was calm. A few early joggers passed by, sprinklers arced across lawns. Nothing about the scene hinted that inside this seemingly ordinary house, an era was definitively ending. At 8:07 a.m., a car pulled up in front of the driveway. The process server stepped out, checked the address against his papers, and greeted me with a professional nod. "Morning," he said. "You ready?" I exhaled slowly. "Yes, thank you." He handed me a copy of the notices for my verification. Everything was in perfect order, clean, lawful, straightforward, a simple statement of ownership, and the required 30-day timeline. No malice, no theatrics, just the unvarnished truth. "Okay," he said. "Let's begin." We walked toward the porch. Just as he reached for the doorbell, the front door swung open. My stepmom stood there in a robe, her hair still in rollers, a mug clutched in her hand. She looked annoyed to see anyone on her doorstep so early, then visibly confused when she spotted the envelope in the server's hand. "Can I help you?" she asked, shifting her weight as if preparing to dismiss a bothersome sales pitch. "Yes, ma'am," he replied evenly. "These are for you." She blinked, took the envelope, glanced at the heading, and then froze completely. "What? What is this?" she demanded. But the server had already taken a step back. "You've been served!" He nodded once to me and walked briskly toward his car. Professional, efficient, detached. She tore the envelope open right there on the porch. Her eyes skimmed a few lines before widening in utter disbelief. Her mouth fell open. She looked up at me, confused at first, then rapidly horrified. "This is a joke," she stammered. "Tell me this is a joke." "It's not," I said quietly. My John appeared behind her, squinting against the bright sunlight. "What's going on?" She shoved the papers into his chest. "Read this. Just read it." He scanned the page, the lines of text slowly forming an expression on his face. Uncertainty, then shock, then profound disbelief. "Eviction," he murmured. "Whose name? Who?" He stopped, looked at me. Truly looked at me for the first time in years. "Emma," he said softly. "Why is your name on the deed?" I held his gaze. "Because I bought the house last month." The words dropped between us like a stone into still water, and ripples spread instantly. My stepmom's face twisted in a grotesque mask. "You bought—" "No. No, you didn't. You can't. This is my house." "It hasn't been," I said gently, "for several weeks." Her eyes flashed with fury. "You're lying. You're trying to embarrass me after last night, aren't you? This is some pathetic retaliation." "If it were revenge," I said, my voice steady, "I would have told the entire party last night. But I didn't, because this has nothing to do with humiliation. I purchased the house, legally, quietly, months before you even announced your move." She shook her head violently. "No, no. You don't have that kind of money. You don't have the connections. You don't have control." I finished the sentence for her softly. "You're right. I don't need your approval anymore." My step-siblings rushed out onto the porch, hair messy, eyes puffy with sleep. "Mom, what's going on?" "Tell them," she snapped at me, her voice shrill. "Tell them what you're doing. Tell them you're kicking us out of our home." It was never your home, I said calmly. It was owned by someone who decided to sell quickly, and I made the offer first. You didn't check the property records, did you? Her daughter stepped forward, indignant. You can't just evict us. We have lives, things to pack, commitments. That's why the notice gives you 30 days, I replied. Everything is by the book. My John stared at the papers again, his voice barely audible. Why didn't you tell me? A small ache tugged at my chest, but only for a second. Would it have mattered? I asked. Would you have listened, or would you have let her talk over me like always? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No answer, just guilt settling in the deepening lines of his face. My stepmom switched tactics instantly, her voice softening, almost trembling with feigned vulnerability. We can talk about this. We can work something out. This doesn't have to happen. It already has, I said. And it's not a punishment. It's a boundary. You told everyone yesterday that the house was too good for someone like me, so now it's yours to leave. Her mask finally cracked. The fake warmth evaporated, revealing pure venom. You ungrateful little... My John cut her off sharply. Stop! His voice wasn't loud, but it was the first time in years I'd heard it carry genuine authority. He turned to me. Is this really your decision? Yes, I said, and it's final. The weight of the silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't suffocating, it wasn't humiliating, it was steady, strong, mine. My stepmom let out a bitter, derisive laugh. So, you think you've won now? You think this makes you powerful? No, I said. I think it makes me responsible for my future, for my peace, for choosing a life where I'm not constantly belittled. She shook from head to toe, anger and panic colliding in her eyes. You can't do this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I replied, my voice unwavering. I'm doing something for myself. John tried to speak again, but the words seemed to collapse before they could form. He looked at the house, then back at me. I could clearly see regret in his eyes, but it was too little, far too late. My step-siblings stood huddled together, whispering frantically. Someone said, "What are we going to do now?" Another muttered, "She can't be serious." But they all knew I was. When they finally began gathering their things, the house no longer echoed with the ghosts of cruelty. Instead, it felt perceptibly lighter, as if years of accumulated tension were gently lifting from the very walls. As they packed hurriedly, I stood in the doorway watching, not with triumph, not with vengeance, but with profound clarity. This was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I didn't have to keep shrinking to fit inside someone else's suffocating story. And as their bags piled into the cars, their voices trembling with disbelief, I realized something fundamental. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the deed. When the last car finally pulled away, the street fell quiet in a way I'd never truly heard before. No shouting, no heavy footsteps thudding up the stairs, no whispers about where I did or didn't belong. Just stillness, clean and exquisitely new. I stepped back inside, letting the door close softly behind me. For the very first time, the house didn't feel hostile. It felt truly mine. Later that afternoon, Grandma called. She'd heard nothing about the scene, only that I sounded lighter than usual. You finally chose yourself, she said, her voice full of warmth. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I felt my throat tighten, but in a beautiful, good way. In the days that followed, my John reached out a few times, short messages, hesitant in tone. I didn't ignore him, but I didn't rush to answer either. Healing, I understood, wasn't a door I could fling open overnight. I painted the living room a fresh, calming color, planted vibrant flowers by the porch, and rearranged the furniture until the space felt undeniably like a beginning instead of a battleground. Standing in the doorway a week later, I looked around the house, quiet, sunlit, finally at peace, and realized something simple yet profound. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the boundary that ultimately saves you. This place, once a constant reminder of everything I lacked, had become irrefutable proof of everything I could build entirely on my own terms. If you've ever been pushed aside or underestimated, know that you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this journey resonated with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.